Well, good morning, church. If you guys are new here, my name is Andrew. I am the lead pastor here at Reunion Church. There's a few of us that will come up here and teach. We usually go verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We are in the book of Genesis, is what we're going through here. Anyone got one of those little, Stacy, put that little book up. Yep, raise it in the air, like you don't care. There we go, that one. So if you're new here and you don't have a Bible, or if you want a Bible, you can take notes in and stuff. Each time we go through a book of the Bible, we'll have these little journals, and I encourage you guys to grab one because you can write down your questions, you can write down your own notes, your own aha moments as you go through these. We have a bunch of them. It's part of what we do as a church, and so if you want one of those, they should be at your table, and then if not, Jen can get you some. So, all right. Also, you guys all, well, at least a handful of you, should have gotten a note, a text from Reunion Church. If you signed up for Flock Note, you'll get a text notification. And we sent out one because this passage is weird. Those of you that have read ahead know, like, wow, 18 that we're going to go through, starting in Genesis chapter 18, is great. It's a good little promise story. You're like, wow, this is really cool. And then chapter 19, you're like, what is this? This is one of those passages that is super weird in the Bible, and we're going to go through it. Usually, we give the complicated passages to Nate, and Nate somehow, actually what he did is we posted like, hey, here's the passage breakdowns, and Nate chose all the ones that were not the complicated verses as we went through this one. So, if you prefer Nate going through those, just let him know. Be like, Nate, we like it better when you do the tough passages. So, we are going to go through some of these chapters, and one of the things that we have to keep in mind as we go through these difficult things, we're looking for the patterns, we're looking for the rhythms, we're looking for the melody that we see Genesis repeating because it is intentional. The author of Genesis was intentional in putting in these melodies, like this right here, of a new creation, creation, failure, decreation, right? And this is a melody that we see throughout Genesis, okay? And we're going to see one of these here with Lot. And it's also something that we begin to see almost like some of these patterns and some of these things that we mess up in our own lives. Hannah, do you have that one little like thing?
About 1 minute.
I can do that. I can talk for a good minute. There's certain patterns that we'll have in our lives that we know probably aren't good for us. Or we're in a problem, and the reason why we're in that problem is because of a poor pattern. So those of you who don't know, I do strongman, which is where you pick something really heavy up and then you put it back down. And I've had a coach now for a few years. And one of the great things about having a coach is they're able to break down certain issues that you have. And so log press is one of my favorite ones, where you press a metal log over your head and you put it back down. And for a long time, I was not good at it. I did not enjoy it. Mostly because I get like crazy back pain because I was picking it up, rolling like this, and basically pressing this way here, which is not great for your back. Oh. Now, that ties in, okay? Because we want God to rescue us out of like a big issue that we have, right? Fix this problem, but then we go right back to the same pattern that got us in that problem. And that's what was happening in the strongman competition here, basically, is that, man, I want my log press to go up. And it went up, right? Some of the coaching and stuff like that, and she was like, hey, that's good, but she's like, you still suck. If you don't know my coach, actually most of you don't, but she is, if you take the directness of Jen, and let's get it done, personality of Jen, and the backhanded compliments of Catherine, and the size of Eddie, and put that into a person, all right? That's my coach. So, she's like, wow, cool, you hit a PR, you still suck. I was like, oh, hurtful. And she's like, you're doing this weird pattern every time you do this. We have to break that pattern. We have to stop doing that pattern. But I had been doing it for so long, this like weird motion that was like causing a lot of back injuries. I didn't have the back injury as much, But if I didn't break the pattern, I was still going to have that injury happening either way. And so she took a lot of time with me correcting my form, telling me I looked terrible, and then eventually, with enough insults, I fixed my form. Okay? Now, God isn't necessarily going to give you insult after insult to correct your form or to break you of this pattern. But a lot of times we can relate to that sheep. We're like, God, help me out of this problem, help me out of this issue, right? There's this pain that I'm going through, God, get me out of this problem. And so God gets you out of that problem, but you refuse to correct the pattern in your life that is leading you to that problem. We need God to reach out, not only to fix our problems, but we need him also to fix the parts of us that are creating those problems. God invites us into his mercy, but he also calls us out of our patterns. God invites us in his mercy to be transformed, to fix some of the pains, the heartaches that we have, which is great that God is going to do those things, but he is going to call you out of patterns that are destructive in your life. And if you choose not to, that's what we begin to kind of see as we read through Genesis. So Genesis chapter 18, verse 1. And the Lord appeared to him, Abram, by the oaks of Mamre. And as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door and met them and bowed down to the earth. And he said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought out and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may be refreshing yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have. And Abram went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of our fine flour. Knead it and make cakes. And Abram ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the young man and prepared it quickly. Then he took curds from the milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is in the tent. And the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening in the tent behind the door. Now Abram and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of a woman had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have this pleasure? The Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh? And say, shall I indeed bear a child, and now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, no, but you did laugh. All right, we'll pause there. Observe a little bit of what was talked about. So these three are coming in, and Abram immediately goes up and worships them. That tells us something about who these are. These were not normal men passing by. This is God himself coming through. It could be a sign of the Trinity. It could be the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and almost like Christophany. I think because of what we read later on, and that 2 continued down to Sodom and Gomorrah, I think more or less this is God's counsel. See, God has a counsel that he invites his creation into to be a part of with his choices as he makes these decisions. He doesn't need to, but all throughout Scripture, he invites them into it. In fact, that was part of the purpose of the creation of mankind, was to be part of this counsel with God. It's not that we have major decision-making power. It's more or less like we're middle management, right? You have top management. Those of you in the corporate world, you kind of understand, like, hey, they tell you what to do. You're like, cool, we'll go do this, right? And that's essentially, like, they bring you in. They don't really need to. But we are the counsel. We are invited to be part of the counsel of God in this, okay? And so most likely, these are part of his council members that have come alongside, some of the spiritual beings that you see throughout the Scripture. And so what's important for us to notice is how Abraham goes up and bows down before these people, and then the way that he brings about hospitality. We cannot overlook this because these two interactions of hospitality go hand in hand with what is going to happen in chapter 19. But Abram goes out of his way, and in any part of the ancient Near Middle East, what we see is like hospitality was a huge sacred duty. If you saw someone coming by, it was a sacred duty, something honorable that you get to do. We look at that a little bit differently today. Hospitality and hosting, we're like, Thanksgiving's coming up, and those of you who are hosting like your house for Thanksgiving, a lot of times most of you are like, I really, really don't want to do this. We're gonna make everything look really nice, we're gonna act like no one lives here, and make sure all the kids' toys are put away, and like pristine, and like, we're not gonna bring out the good drinks, we're gonna bring out like the cheap alcohol and stuff if you have it there, because you don't want your family to have the good stuff, right? And so we kind of treat hospitality and hosting differently than how they would have viewed it. It was a huge, honorable thing to invite someone to have a meal with you. And I think that's a key thing for us when we're thinking about hospitality, because there is a huge difference between hospitality and hosting. Hosting is where you go all out, okay? And you exhaust yourself and entertain people and you have all these plans for it. Hosting is where you just invite people in and you help them feel the love that you have invited into your family home. That is hosting. And hospitality. Hospitality is not nearly as exhausting, not nearly as weary, and should be life-giving when you are hospitable to people. If you feel exhausted having someone else in your home, and you're just like feeling like you have all these burden and all these checklists and all these things you have to do, most likely you're viewing hospitality wrong. And you might be practicing it wrong. I think most of our parents' generations, they usually did just hosting. And that's what we're used to. And what we're seeing now, what people enjoy, is just hospitality. It's like, hey man, we're having white people burrito tacos, right? We had this with Stacy, and like she came over, and we're like, hey, white people burrito tacos. And it was maybe a taco. And that might be like a soft word on it, right? But it's like, hey, we're just gonna have it over. We're not gonna make anything super fancy. We're still gonna have dishes out, right? Our kids are still out there. You don't have to deal with our crazy dogs, right? And it's like, hey, you're coming into our life to see a part of our life. And so by Abram taking this moment to invite into this hospitality, it was a sacred duty of saying, hey, God has called us into this place. God has given us this land, and we are here, and we're waiting on them. We are serving these people here, okay? Now, this interaction with Sarah is also critical, because this is the first time Sarah has actually heard the promise given to her. This is the third time. The other two times, they've been spoken just to Abram. This time, Sarah hears this for the first time. This is the first time that God actually speaks to her, and she hears the promise that is given to her. And she responds the way that most people would. The laughter, when you see this type of laughter, it is not like, it was a major disbelief, right? And so she has a major disbelief this will happen. And she denies it, as any person would, of like, oh God, we didn't do this. But she misunderstands the purpose and the promise that is given to her here in this moment. Now, this is a creation story. This is a recreation story. She has been burdened. The chapter before, there was this huge failure that happened, right? And we're in the recreation as this promise is given to him. So following the melody, we kind of know what's coming up here, all right? Following the melody, we got the creation. We're like right at that turning point when we see the melodies coming through. We see this promise, God promising a creation, a child, like this promise across the board. There's something about to happen. Verse 16, then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them, and set them on their way. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall truly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and the household after him to keep the way of the Lord and doing righteous and justice, so that the Lord may bring Abraham what he has promised to him. Then the Lord said, because of the outcry against Sodom, underline outcry, that is a very important language that we've seen repeated in Genesis, against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sins are very grave. I will go down, also important to underline, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Then, so the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, but Abram stood still before the Lord. God is having a conversation with himself, all right? He's like, oh. And it's like Abram's right here, but he's not like talking to Abram directly. So it's kind of like this, I don't know. If you talk to yourself, just know it is a divine attribute. So he's talking to himself. He's like, hey, you know what? We've invited Abram, and he's basically inviting Abraham into this council to be part of what is God's plan, what is he doing. He's inviting him into this spot. Okay, now we see the outcry and that I will go down. You think back on Genesis, think back on the previous stories of Genesis. Where else have we heard the outcry and that I will go down? Where else have we seen that? What did God say with the Tower of Babel? God said at that point again, like, I will go down. I will see this. The outcry of injustice, Cain and Abel. The outcry of his brother's blood. So we're seeing, hey, it's giving you this warning sign of something that's about to come. Because what happened after Cain and Abel, what happened after Babel, like we're starting to see this warming up for us. But we have this really interesting section, verse 23. Then Abram drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you sweep away that place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abram answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of the 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I found 45 there. Again he spoke to him and said, suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, oh Lord, don't be angry with me, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. And he answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, behold, if I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, suppose 20 are there. And he answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, for I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of the 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went on his way when he had finished speaking with Abram, and Abram returned to his place. This is kind of like a conversation with like a 5-year-old, right? So if you understand this conversation even just this morning, right? And it's just like, hey, are we there yet? What about like in 5 minutes, we'll be closer? What about in like 10 minutes, we'll be closer? And I said, yes, we will still be closer. We will be in this path, right? And so you can see God is incredibly patient with Abram here. And what's interesting is Abram's been invited into this conversation. And Abram thinks, oh, hey, you know what? I'm going to tell God how it's supposed to be, right? God, you're a just God. You're a good God. Surely you wouldn't. And God's like, you're right, I won't do that, right? Well, God, maybe, what about if we lack 5? What if we lack 10 more? What if we lack 10? It just goes down and down. And this is where, again, God is incredibly patient with his creation in understanding him. He knows he is an infinite being talking to a created being. And that it's very hard for us sometimes to understand and to comprehend what it means for God to be good and for God to be just. What it means for God to give grace and what it means for God to give wrath. How does he do this? God, how do you know what is right? Because we wrestle with it. And God is patient with us. God is kind with us. He never once told Abram, shut up, right? Like, I am God, I'm going to do what's right. And sometimes, like, we have questions about the Bible, and that's the important part, like, table talks, where we can kind of ask them these questions. No one's going to be like, dude, that was stupid. Don't you get it? God just loves you. Why don't you just understand that? Why don't you just accept that God loves you? That's like, well, there's a lot that we go through that doesn't show good love. And so in these table talk conversations, we can break down and talk around these things because God is very patient with us, no doubt, and so we need to be very patient with other people as well. As people are trying to figure out and wrestle through whatever they have gone through, people have to mull and chew over this because their experience might show something very different. The idea of God being a father to those who don't have fathers, who have not had good fathers, is a very difficult thing to understand. When God talks about how, like, he is the bride of the church and, like, that he is there to take care of you, to provide for you, but when you haven't had that in a husband, it's very hard, and it will impact your understanding of who God is. And so God is patient with you. Do not feel guilty or condemned that you're doubting or that you're questioning or you're trying to figure out. That's what's happening here. God invites him in, not expecting him to figure out things, not expecting him to know how everything works. God has called you to be part of this great plan he has. And as you step out in faith, it's okay to have questions. It's okay to figure out what is his plan for you. God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to figure this out? How do you want me to figure out family? How do you want me to figure out my career? How do you want me to figure out work? How do you want me to figure out how to just deal with people? And God is patient with you. Ask your questions. Pursue after those things. Now, Abraham is haggling here. And most of us don't have an experience with haggling. Those of us who went to Taiwan did have an experience with haggling. And I am not great at it, right? So there's these night markets, that you kind of go to, and like at the night market, like people are like yelling and like offering stuff, and then they're filming the big white Americans that are walking around and stuff, right? And so they're always trying to get us to buy something as well on these night markets. And some of it's really, really good. Some of it makes you want to throw up. But you're out here, and they're offering these things, and I'm terrible at it. But then, like, where's Kevin? Where's he at? Oh, Kevin and Scarlett were amazing at this, right? Just like haggling with people that don't even speak our language very well. And Kevin and Scarlett do not speak Chinese at all. And they're just haggling with them of like, yeah, how about 2 for 50% off? And they're like, yeah, sure. Like Kevin got a guy just to give him, what is it, that butt nutter? It's
What?
not nutter.
Beetle nuts.
Beetle nut, that's what it was. I don't know what nut butter is, or butt nutter. Anyways, this guy just gives it to Kevin, like for free, right? And I'm over here, and I'm like, oh, 2 for 1? They're like, no. 2 for like 150% more. And like, I don't want to come off like racist, and I didn't really understand this. Like, yeah, sure, okay. And I just hand them the money, right? And they're like making money off of me, so they lose money off of Kevin. But like, I'm so bad at it. Like, I cannot haggle with people even remotely. Like, they just see right through. Like, this guy will pay. He'll pay for the price. He'll pay more. And I did multiple times. We see God is not very good at haggling either, because what's supposed to happen is you go really low, right? You go pretty low, and then the seller goes like, how about here? And then you just kind of like waver through, like, we understand the basics of it, right? And so, like, Kevin, you got like, I don't know, you got so many things out there for free somehow. So many things. And he's just like, no, free. And they're like, 500 yen. And they're like, free. And he's like, 50, free. Okay. And they give it to him, right? And that's essentially what God is doing to what Abraham is doing to God. And so God is not very good at haggling either. So I feel okay about this. And God's like, yeah, 50, I will destroy people. And then, so you see this like, well, don't be mad at me, God. Don't be frustrated. But what about 5? And he just goes all the way down at this point. And every time God's like, hey, we're not haggling. If there's anyone that is righteous, I am a good and just God. They're not going to be swept up in this. And he just keeps on. And for some reason, 10 is where Abraham thought it was safe, right? He just thought that was like a safe number. And he walks away. Abraham is invited in to this trust and intercession for this city to talk through with these things. And then what we're going to see is that Lot, Abram's nephew, is called out of the compromise, out of these patterns. We have the same God, the same grace and mercy, but different responses. God's mercy pulls us out of the danger, but his grace is what's needed to pull us out of the patterns. And so, now we get into the weird stuff. Chapter 19. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting there at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed to himself with his face to the earth, and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, saying they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, highlight that, that's important for us to kind of see. All of the people, down to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, and he shut the door after them. And he said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let them bring them out to you, and to do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow comes as a sojourner, and he becomes the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." And they pressed hard against the man Lot, and they drew near to breaking down the door. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were going out to the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, son-in-laws, daughters, anyone who you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because of the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his son-in-law, who was to marry his daughters, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his son-in-laws as jesting. As the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Take up your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and the 2 daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out of the house of the city. And as they brought him out, they said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or to stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh, my lords, no. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me there, and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee, and a little one. Let me escape to this place that you also favor, and I will not, Is this not a, so let me go back into verse 20. Behold, this city is near to flee, and it is a little one. Let me escape there, for it is not a little one, and my life will be saved. And he, the angel, said to him, behold, I grant you this favor, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive. Therefore, that city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar, and the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all of the valley and the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife, behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abram went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and behold, all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that God destroyed the cities of the valley. God remembered Abram, and sent Lot out in the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the city in which Lot had lived. All right. There's a lot. And we won't be able to cover crazy amount of detail in here because it'll only get more weird. All right. And that's what Table Talks is for, where we can kind of break down some of these things and whatever questions we have as we dig through this. So, a few things we have to notice. Early on, we notice Lot practicing the same hospitality, almost word for word, of how Abraham practiced the hospitality toward God. So he stops them, and again, out of honor, especially to sojourners, especially those traveling through, it was a huge honor to do this. And Lot pushes for this, saying, hey, stay here, stay here. Now, what does that say about Sodom and Gomorrah? If it was a sacred duty, especially to sojourners, to treat these people with honor and to respect and to provide hospitality, when the city's response, every man, every woman, or every man, every young and old, came together to gang rape, basically, these sojourners. They have gone so far that that is the exact opposite of what was honorable in most cultures. That they were going to do the most dishonorable thing you could do to someone. Verse 4 provides the emphasis of the evil of these men. That they were all there to know them sexually, in an abusive, in a violent way. Sodom's abuse signals the societal breakdown that this city had. Now, these men were not only men, but they were angels sent by God, his messengers that were with him, part of the divine council. Where else in Scripture, when we're looking at the rhythms, do we see something like this? Do we see where spiritual beings having a disturbing relationship with mankind? We see that at the flood. We see that in the flood narrative. The Nephilim who come through, and if you have questions, Nate can give a specific message specifically on what all of that means. But these guys so far, it's not even, they want to do this to the angels, to the spiritual beings. And you have to understand, like, the use of these spiritual beings with the city. There's in chapter 15 or 16, all of Sodom and Gomorrah's cities come together to wage war against those who were part of, like, the Nephilim undertaking, against these other spiritual beings in here. And then, like, that's what you break down when you read this weird battle that takes place. We didn't go into detail on it because it's really weird and there's a lot in between it. But if you read through this, like, oh wait, this is like Sodom and Gomorrah's like history. They have this corruption in what they are creating. Lot tries to protect them. Lot tries to come up with his own path of salvation to protect these spiritual beings. And it's a weird one. It is a one that any parent is like, what are you talking about? That would never be an option for me. To offer my daughters instead? And so Lot is trying to come up with this path, trying to come up with a solution. And it's not a good one. It is his own path, it is his own desires. In fact, it is the spiritual beings that have to save him. And all of this is creating a picture of it is a flood narrative happening again. Because the angels reach out, pull him into the house, and shut the door. This is the same language that when the rain fell on the ark, that God closed the door of the ark. Ark and house in Hebrew, very similar. It's almost like a poetic language that is being used here. And so they bring them in. And then we see another flood happening. Because of where they're at, because of this homosexuality and gang rape that is happening in here, this city is rained. And this is the only second time it's rained in Genesis. And it rains with fire, as God promised it would happen in the flood narrative. The city then is decreated. This is the decreation. We see the failure. Now we see the decreation happening here. And anyone who looks back at this place, looks back at this thing as a good thing, faces the decreation. They fall under the decreation. That's what happened with Lot's wife. Why did she get turned into salt? I don't know. There's a lot of different theories. None of it made sense to me, so I'm not going to try to preach to you about the other theories on it. There's a lot. All that we know, though, is that for sure, she looks back on the city as a good thing and is in that decreation state now as well. Lot flees to Zoar. Zoar was one of those cities that rose up with Sodom and Gomorrah. Lots of bad decisions. Like, Lot makes terrible choices. Just terrible choices because they look good. They look appealing to the eye. They make sense to him logically. When the land was offered to him, he saw Sodom and Gomorrah and said it's like the land of Egypt. Anything associated with Egypt is never good. And he said it's like Eden, but it was a fake Eden. And it makes sense. It made logical sense that he goes down to this place. And he makes a terrible decision. Even his decision to try and save them is a terrible decision. And then he makes a terrible decision to go into Zoar. Now, remember that emphasis on little. It is a little city. It is a little town. That is also going to be a play on the next weird part that we're going to read. Abraham was called into God's counsel. Lot was called out of this land. But two very different responses. Abraham walked into the council even when God called Lot out of the land that he was in, or when God called Abraham out of the land that he was in. Is a different response than when God calls Lot out of his land. And so, when he gives presented an option, he has this really weird response where he's like, he's taking his time. He waited until the morning to leave. And he didn't really want to leave. And they literally were dragging him out, being like, Lot, get out. We're going to destroy this city. Did you not hear what they wanted to do to you as well? And you're still lingering here? Like, any of us would look at that and be like, why are you still hanging around this place? But he's lingering in this area. And then he says, don't send me to the hills, I'll die. This is like where else was that said? Who else came up with a plan of salvation like that? Who else said, God, what you're asking is too much, I can't go. In Genesis, Cain used the same language. Cain was like, God, you can't send me to this place. Like, God, people will kill me. I'll die there. And so he comes up with a different plan. What happens after Cain? Oh, even further destruction, even for the Tower of Babel begins to rise up from his children. His descendants make a terrible choice. His descendants bring up this new failure to come about. What happened after the deconstruction of the flood? Oh, with Noah and his son. That really weird passage. So again, we're seeing the rhythm. No, something really weird is about to happen. Now, verse 30, Lot went up from Zoar and lived in the hills, and his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So, he goes to Zoar, and he's afraid to live there. Rightfully so. Like, okay, wait, God just destroyed all these places. I'm not going to live there. And then he goes back up to the hills. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, also in some translations, it'll say the little one, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. So she believes the whole world is gone. The whole world is destroyed. It's just us. That's so weird. Come to us. Come, let's make our father drink wine. Who else drank wine and had a terrible thing happen to them? Noah. Let us drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the offspring of our father. So they made their father drink wine, and that night the firstborn went into him and laid with her father. And he did not know when she laid down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the little one, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, and we may preserve the offspring of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and laid with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their fathers. The firstborn bore a son named Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son. His name is called Ben-Amah. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. All right. A little awkward, a little weird. And that's kind of the point of this passage, is that there is no ancient culture that I've been able to see or that other scholars have read into where this type of relationship is normalized, that it is a okay thing. It's always been disgusting, vile, and gross. And so you have God's person that he has chosen out of this area going into this terrible, disgusting path that not even the rest of the world practices or believes. It is that vile and disgusting out here. The little one, the little city, the younger, the plot for Lot to find his own salvation route. God, send me to this little city. God, I can't make it there. I'll die. There's no way I can follow the plan and the purpose of what you have for me. Send me to this little place over here. And it is a play on words that Lot's decision affects his whole family. Follows through with the rest of his family line here. This is a very similar scene to Noah in the tent with Ham. And then from this terrible choice comes 2 nations that Israel is at war against, and they cause a ton of problems for Israel. In fact, so the Ammonites, those of you who were with us through the David series, and we taught through David and 1st and 2nd Samuel as we walked through this, the Ammonites, well, eventually there's a king that raises up, Nahash. And he's the one who is like, oh, hey, we're going to basically starve these people, and if they want to escape, I'm going to pluck out all of your eyes. And then you can go and escape. Then you can flee. He is this wicked, corrupt king. He's also known as the Snake King. Nahash is a snake. And if Ben was here, he'd be really excited because he loved learning about the Snake King and what that represented. But that was the Snake King, again, the snake, the serpent, the Satan. From this lineage, you see this work of the Satan coming through, attacking God's own people. Lot's continued consequences of not believing in God, of trying to bring about his own salvation, of trusting what made sense to him, created enemies for his family. Lot continued to choose the path from the land on how he wanted to be saved, on what he wanted to do, to all the way down to his retreat. God's mercy pulled him out of the danger, as the angel said. But Lot refused to trust God and his grace to pull him out of the patterns. We often want salvation from our consequences, from the pain, from the issue that we're in right now, but we don't want to be transformed from our patterns. God literally took Lot by the hand and saved him. But then Lot asked, God, can't I keep a little bit of a lifestyle that is nearly destroying me? Is this little sin that bad? Is this little issue that I'm refusing to follow in obedience that bad, God? Partial obedience is still disobedience. He goes from the green land to Sodom's suburbs, to Sodom's gates, to Zor, to the caves. All because him refusing to let God address the patterns in his life. The situation that keeps on getting you into this spot. As a pastor, a lot of people will come up. A lot of people are like, man, God, we're in such a tough time. I don't know why this keeps on happening. I go through this issue all the time, over and over again. There's a pattern you're not addressing in your life. Even as a church, we were talking about how we want to set up a process where if people need help financially, we can help them, right? And Money Boy Shane's came up with this really good process that kind of like walks people through. And one of the things that we try to help people through is like, we just don't want to hand out money, but you're most likely in this situation financially because of something. Because of something that's been repeated. Let's try to observe what's happening with that. Let's try to see what we can do to assist in breaking some of those cycles, breaking some of those patterns. This is why counseling is such a good thing. Because sometimes you've been practicing that pattern for so long, it is just part of who you are now. You just do these things now. And you need someone to be able to break down with you what caused this pattern. What is causing this pattern and this cycle in your life? Where you keep on making these bad decisions, where you keep on pushing people away, where you may not be able to hold a job, whatever it might be. The importance of counseling, of therapy, even just basic community, to be able to help you break and observe seeing some of those patterns. But you have to make the choice to follow God's grace to break those patterns. Because you created that out of a defense, out of something in your own selfish nature that said, hey, this is how I'm going to protect myself instead of relying on God. And so you have to take a step of faith. That God, what God has promised, what God has said, will transform that for you. Will break that for you. Whatever you've been running to that pattern for, that God's way is better. That God will take care of that for you. You know what's weird? 2 Peter says, Lot, that righteous man. After we just read this, we're like, there's nothing righteous about this dude. This dude is messed up. Some of us would have been like, hey, you know what? If God destroyed Lot with Sodom and Gomorrah, probably not a bad thing, because this is weird. That's a normal, just response. But you're right, he didn't deserve this. You're right, he didn't earn God's righteousness. And that's the whole point. Because Abram didn't deserve God's righteousness either. He believed and he trusted God, and it was accredited to him as righteous. If Abraham can be righteous, Lot can be righteous by God's grace. By the grace that God gives each one of us. You don't deserve it. You don't earn it. You're just as messed up. In some ways, you're just like Lot. But God's grace is there for you. If we just left right here, this would be a really messed up passage. You're like, man, what else could possibly be good coming from this? This is where understanding the story of the Bible is so important. Because who came from the Moabites? Well, there's this little book in the Bible called Ruth, all right? A small little book where some of God's people go into the land of Moabites because of a famine. And those men get married, and those men all die from the famine. But one of the wives, Ruth, sticks around with Naomi. And they go back to Israel. They go back to God's people. And they live a hard life where she makes the hard decisions to do what is right, to care for her family, to care for those who are disenfranchised, to care for those who were abandoned, to care for those who had nothing. Because at this point, all of them were poor. They could not get a job. They could not work. Their husbands had all died. There was no inheritance for them. So Ruth does what is right, even though it's difficult. She seeks out the kinsman redeemer, the only man that could actually provide for them. And she goes, she lays at his feet, she keeps on flirting, trying to get his attention, and be like, oh, marry me, right? Like, very Bible college-y type of stuff, right? And so he goes, and he wakes up, and she's there by his feet and stuff, and that's a whole different thing. Chris loves to talk about that. You can bug Chris about it, all right? Not that he has a thing with feet, but he wakes up, and he's like, oh, Ruth. He's like, I will definitely be your kinsman redeemer. Be quiet about this, because this looks weird. And so, he goes through this process, he redeems her, and who comes from Ruth's lineage? Oh, King David. Who comes from that lineage? The Christ. This is God's story. Even though you might have those patterns, and those patterns might be broken down from years of family tradition. Your parents did this, and their parents did this, and it was tradition over tradition. God breaks those things. Through his grace, through his mercy, he redeems it. If it's alcoholism, if it's abuse, if it's whatever it might be, he redeems it. You don't have to follow those patterns. But his grace overcomes and redeems that. You are not stuck or defined by your patterns or your family lineage, but by Christ, trusting in his salvation. Let's pray. God, I pray for this time of table talks as we try to break down, as we try to make sense of a very dark and disturbing passage. I pray for Adam and Becky as they have a very difficult conversation to have with teens. That God, that you, it's so good for us to actually just see the story playing out. When we understand the storyline of the Bible, why is this in here? Oh, that you have a plan, that you redeem people, that you see people, that you care for people, that you are a God of justice, as we see happening with Sodom and Gomorrah, and for continuous sin and harm to other people, that you do not tolerate that, but you are a God who gives grace and mercy, that we would walk in that promise. God, we pray this in your name. Amen. If you're new to Table Talks, there's going to be a person coming to your table to help out and guide the conversation with you, or to start at the conversation.